His Chance in Life by Rudyard Kipling. Then a pile of heads be laid 30,000, heaped on high all to please the Kaffir maid, where the Oxus ripples by. Grimly spake, Attila Khan, love hath made this thing a man Ota's story. If you go straight away from levies and government house, lists past trades, balsfar beyond everything, and everybody you ever knew in your respectable life, you cross in time the border line where the last drop of white blood ends and the full tide of black sets in it, would be easier to talk to a new-made duchess on the spur of the moment than to the borderline folk without violating some of their conventions or hurting their feelings. The black and the white mix very quaintly in their ways. Sometimes the white shows in spurts of fierce childish pride, which is pride of race run crooked, and sometimes the black in still fiercer abasement and humility, half heathenish customs and strange unaccountable impulses to crime. One of these days this people understand they are far lower than the class whence Derozio, the man who imitated Byron, sprung, will turn out a writer or a poet, and then we shall know how they live and what they feel. In the meantime, any stories about them cannot be absolutely correct in fact or inference. Miss Vezies came from across the border line to look after some children who belonged to a lady until a regularly ordained nurse could come out. The lady said Miss Vezies was a bad, dirty nurse and inattentive. It never struck her that Miss Vezies had her own life to lead and her own affairs to worry over, and that these affairs were the most important things in the world to Miss Vezies. Very few mistresses admit this sort of reasoning. Miss Vezies was as black as a boot, and to our standard of taste, hideously ugly. She wore cotton-print gowns and bulged shoes, and when she lost her temper with the children, she abused them in the language of the borderline, which is part English, part Portuguese, and part native. She was not attractive, but she had her pride, and she preferred being called Miss Vezies. Every Sunday she dressed herself wonderfully and went to see her mamma, who lived for the most part on an old cane chair in a greasy tusher silk dressing gown, and a big rabbit warren of a house full of Vezaises, Pereiras, Ribeiras, Lisboas, and Ganselveses, and a floating population of loafers, besides fragments of the day's bazaar, garlic stale incense, clothes thrown on the floor, petticoats hung on strings for screens, old bottles, pewter crucifixes, dried immortelles, pariah puppies, plaster images of the Virgin, and hats without crowns. Miss Vezies drew 20 rupees a month for acting as nurse, and she squabbled weekly with her mamma as to the percentage to be given towards housekeeping. When the quarrel was over, Michel de Cruz used to shamble across the low mud wall of the compound and make love to Miss Vezies after the fashion of the borderline, which is hedged about with much ceremony. Michel was a poor sickly weed and very black, but he had his pride. He would not be seen smoking a hookah for anything, and he looked down on natives as only a man with 7/8 native blood in his veins can. The Vezies family had their pride too. They traced their descent from a mythical platelayer who had worked on the Soane Bridge when railways were new in India, and they valued their English origin. Michel was a telegraph signaller on Rs. 35 a month. The fact that he was in government employ made Mrs. Vezies lenient to the shortcomings of his ancestors. There was a compromising legend. Anna the tailor brought it from Pune that a black Jew of Cochin had once married into the de Cruz family, while it was an open secret that an uncle of Mrs. de Cruz was at that very time doing menial work connected with cooking for a club in southern India. He sent Mrs. de Cruz 7 rupees 8 annas a month, but she felt the disgrace to the family very keenly all the same. However, in the course of a few Sundays, Mrs. Vezies brought herself to overlook these blemishes and gave her consent to the marriage of her daughter with Michel, on condition that Michel should have at least 50 rupees a month to start married life. Upon this wonderful prudence must have been a lingering touch of the mythical platelayer's Yorkshire blood, for across the borderline people take a pride in marrying when they please, not when they can. Having regard to his departmental prospects, Miss Vezies might as well have asked Michel to go away and come back with the moon in his pocket. But Michel was deeply in love with Miss Vezies, and that helped him to endure. He accompanied Miss Vezies to Mass one Sunday, and after Mass, walking home through the hot stale dust with her hand in his, he swore by several saints whose names would not interest you never to. Forget Miss Vezies, and she swore by her honor, and the saint's oath runs rather curiously in nomen sanctissimi, whatever the name of the she-saint is, and so forth, ending with a kiss on the forehead, a kiss on the left cheek, and a kiss on the mouth, never to forget Michel. Next week, Michel was transferred, and Miss Vezies dropped tears upon the window sash of the intermediate compartment as he left the station. If you look at the telegraph map of India, you will see a long line skirting the coast from Bakargunj to Madras. Michel was ordered to Tabasu, a little sub-office one-third down this line, to send messages on from Berhampur to Chikakola, and to think of Miss Vezies, and his chances of getting 50 rupees a month out of office hours. He had the noise of the Bay of Bengal, and a Bengali babu for company, nothing more. He sent foolish letters, with crosses tucked inside the flaps of the envelopes, to Miss Vezies. When he had been at Tabasu for nearly 3 weeks, his chance came. Never forget that unless the outward and visible signs of our authority are always before a native, he is as incapable as a child of understanding what authority means, or where is the danger of disobeying it. Tabasu was a forgotten little place, with a few Orissa Mohammedans in it, these hearing nothing of the collector sahib for some time, and heartily despising the Hindu sub-judge. Arranged to start a little Moharram riot of their own, but the Hindus turned out and broke their heads, when finding lawlessness, pleasant Hindus and Mohammedans together raised an aimless sort of Donnybrook, just to see how far they could go. They looted each other's shops, and paid off private grudges in the regular way. It was a nasty little riot, but not worth putting in the newspapers. Michel was working in his office when he heard the sound that a man never forgets all his life, of ahia, of an angry crowd. When that sound drops about 3 tones and changes to a thick droning ut, the man who hears it had better go away. If he is alone, the native police inspector ran in and told Michel that the town was in an uproar and coming to wreck the telegraph office. The babu put on his cap and quietly dropped out of the window, while the police inspector, afraid, but obeying the old race instinct, which recognizes a drop of white blood as far as it can be diluted, said, "What orders does the sahib give?" The sahib decided Michel, though horribly frightened. He felt that for the hour he, the man with the Cochin Jew and the menial uncle in his pedigree, was the only representative of English authority in the place. Then he thought of Miss Vezies and the 50 rupees, and took the situation on himself. There were 7 native policemen in Tabasu, and 4 crazy smoothbore muskets among them. All the men were grey with fear, but not beyond leading. Michel dropped the key of the telegraph instrument and went out at the head of his army to meet the mob. As the shouting crew came round a corner of the road, he dropped and fired the men behind him, loosing instinctively at the same time. The whole crowd cursed to the backboned and ran, leaving 1 man dead and another dying in the road. Michel was sweating with fear, but he kept his weakness under and went down into the town past the house where the sub-judge had barricaded himself. The streets were empty. Tabasu was more frightened than Michel, for the mob had been taken at the right time. Michel returned to the telegraph office and sent a message to Chikakola asking for help. Before an answer came, he received a deputation of the elders of Tabasu telling him that the sub-judge said his actions generally were unconstitutional and trying to bully him, but the heart of Michel D. Cruz was big and white in his breast because of his love for Miss Vezies, the nurse girl, and because he had tasted for the first time responsibility and success. Those two make an intoxicating drink and have ruined more men than ever has whiskey. Michel answered that the sub-judge might say what he pleased, but until the assistant collector came, the telegraph signaller was the government of India in Tabasu, and the elders of the town would be held accountable for further rioting. Then they bowed their heads and said, "Show mercy," or words to that effect, and went back in great fear, each accusing the other of having begun the rioting. Early in the dawn, after a night's patrol with his 7 policemen, Michel went down the road, musket in hand, to meet the assistant collector who had ridden in to quell Tabasu. But in the presence of this young Englishman, Michel felt himself slipping back more and more into the native, and the tale of the Tabasu riots ended with the strain on the teller in an hysterical outburst of tears bred by sorrow that he had killed a man, shame that he could not feel as uplifted as he had felt through the night, and childish anger that his tongue could not do justice to his great deeds. It was the white drop in Michel's veins dying out, though he did not know it. But the Englishman understood, and after he had schooled those men of Tabasu, and had conferred with the sub-judge, till that excellent official turned green, he found time to draft an official letter describing the conduct of Michel, which letter filtered through the proper channels, and ended in the transfer of Michel up-country once more on the imperial salary of 66 rupees a month. So he and Miss Vezies were married with great state and ancientry, and now there are several little cruises sprawling about the verandas of the Central Telegraph Office. But if the whole revenue of the department he serves were to be his reward, Michel could never repeat what he did at Tabasu for the sake of Miss Vezies, the nurse girl. Which proves that when a man does good work out of all proportion to his pay, in 7 cases out of 9, there is a woman at the back of the virtue. The 2 exceptions must have suffered from sunstroke,